Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. The words hung in the air of the small bookstore office, spoken by my brother Daniel with clinical precision. I kept my face neutral, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "May I ask why?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Daniel adjusted his glasses, the gesture so familiar it almost hurt. "Sales are down. We need fresh direction. The board agrees it's time for change." The board consisted of Daniel, our mother, and our cousin Marcus. Hardly an impartial tribunal, but I nodded as if this made perfect sense, as if I hadn't seen this coming for months. "Of course, I'll clear out my desk." I walked out of Thornfield Books, the store our grandfather had founded that I had managed for 15 years, with dignity intact. Only when I reached my car did I allow myself a single deep breath that released some of the pressure building in my chest. My name is Eleanor Hayes. Until 10 minutes ago, I was the managing director of Thornfield Books, the largest independent bookstore in Laurel Springs. And I had just been fired by my younger brother. I drove through our small Georgia town, past the historic courthouse and the row of antique shops, to the place that had been my sanctuary for the past 7 years. Just outside town, down a winding road shaded by ancient oaks, lay Hayes Heritage Gardens, 5 acres of botanical wonder that had once been our family's homestead. The iron gates swung open as I approached, recognizing my car. I parked beside the small office building and stepped out into the humid afternoon. Immediately, the scent of gardenias and rich soil enveloped me, and my shoulders lowered a fraction. Jackson Blake, my head gardener, emerged from between rows of heirloom tomatoes, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You're early today," he said, then frowned as he took in my expression. "What happened?" "Daniel fired me," I said, the words still feeling unreal. "Effective immediately." Jackson's weathered face darkened. "He can't run that store without you. Everyone knows that." I smiled faintly. "Apparently, not everyone. Is Sophia here?" "In the greenhouse with the new seedlings." I nodded and made my way down the gravel path, past beds of native perennials and carefully labeled medicinal herbs. The greenhouse stood at the far end of the property, a gleaming testament to modern design amid the centuries-old landscape. Sophia Chen, my business partner and botanist extraordinaire, looked up as I entered. Her dark hair was piled atop her head, secured with what appeared to be a pencil. "Well, it happened," I said, sinking onto a wooden stool. "Daniel finally did it." Sophia's hands stilled over the seedling trays. "He fired you? Today?" "In and out in under 5 minutes. Very efficient." "Bastard," she muttered, then straightened. "So we're implementing Plan Persephone?" Despite everything, I smiled. We'd named our contingency plan after the goddess who spent half her time in the underworld and half in the world above, much like how I'd divided my energy between the bookstore and our gardens for years. Yes, it's time. 7 years earlier, when my grandfather passed away, he left Thornfield Books to all 3 grandchildren jointly. Daniel had been incensed, arguing that as the only male grandchild, the business should have gone solely to him. Our cousin Marcus, always conflict-averse, had sided with Daniel in most decisions since then. I'd seen the writing on the wall early. Daniel had never forgiven me for being named managing director by our grandfather's will. Until such time as Eleanor chooses to step down, the document had specified. Daniel had spent years ensuring that choice would eventually be made for me. What my brother hadn't known, what no one in my family knew, was that I'd been building something of my own all along. The land where Hayes Heritage Gardens now stood had been part of our family property for generations, but had fallen into disuse. When I discovered the original botanical journals of my great-grandmother Eleanor Hayes, my namesake, documenting hundreds of native plant species and their uses, I'd been inspired. I quietly purchased the land from a distant cousin during a family estate sale, using savings and a small business loan. Most assumed I was being sentimental about family history. Only Sophia, whom I'd met at a horticultural conference, understood the true potential. "We've been ready for this for months," Sophia said now, removing her gardening gloves. "The contracts are signed. The inventory's complete. All we have to do is notify the vendors." I nodded, running my fingers along the edge of a seedling tray. "And the bookstore account?" Sophia smiled. Check your email. I pulled out my phone and opened my inbox. There it was. Confirmation that Hayes Literary Partners, our small publishing company, had just been accepted as the exclusive distributor for Everhill Press, one of the largest independent publishers in the Southeast. The same publisher that supplied nearly 40% of Thornfield Books' inventory. What Daniel didn't understand, had never bothered to learn, was that the book industry wasn't just about selling stories. It was about relationships. Over 15 years, I had built connections with publishers, authors, and distributors across the country. When I sensed Daniel's coup approaching, I had quietly formed Hayes Literary Partners as a small distribution company, starting with local authors and gradually expanding. I had never intended to compete with Thornfield. The Gardens and the small publishing venture were meant to be complementary businesses, something that could enrich our town's cultural landscape. But Daniel had made his choice. Now I would make mine. Let's notify Everhill that they should direct all future Thornfield orders through Hayes Literary, I told Sophia, and contact the other publishers on our list. What about Marion's book? Launch next week? Sophia asked, referring to a local authors event we'd scheduled at Thornfield. Text her. See if she'd prefer to move it to the garden pavilion instead. As I walked from the greenhouse to my office, I felt a strange combination of grief and liberation. I hadn't wanted this conflict, but there was undeniable freedom in no longer having to fight for respect in my family's business. My office in the Gardens was small but sunlit, with windows overlooking a knot garden designed according to my great-grandmother's plans. On the wall hung framed pages from her botanical journals, the careful illustrations and precise handwriting, a reminder of the legacy I was building upon. I spent the afternoon making calls and sending emails, setting in motion the transition we'd prepared for. By evening, every major supplier to Thornfield Books had been notified that Hayes Literary Partners would now be handling their distribution in the Laurel Springs area. At 6, my phone rang. Daniel. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded when I answered. "Hello to you too, Daniel. Don't play games. Every publisher I've called today says I need to order through some company called Hayes Literary Partners. What is this?" I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunset paint the gardens in gold. "It's my company. We're a regional distributor for several publishing houses now." The silence on the other end was deeply satisfying. "You can't do this," he finally said, voice tight. "This is sabotage." "No, it's business. You wanted to run Thornfield your way, without me. Now you can." "But the publisher relationships? Those were always mine. You built a competing business while working for Thornfield? That's a breach of check my employment contract," I interrupted calmly. Grandfather had it written specifically to allow me to pursue horticultural and literary ventures outside of store operations. He knew how much I loved both books. And gardens. Another silence, this one longer. "The board will fight this," he finally said. "They can try. But evergreen clauses are difficult to break, and most of our suppliers have already signed with Hayes Literary. You can either work with me as your distributor or find new suppliers." "This isn't over, Eleanor. For today, it is. I'll have my personal items from the office sent to the Gardens." I hung up feeling strangely calm. The die was cast. After years of preparing for this moment, it had finally arrived, and I found I was ready. The next morning, I was in the garden gift shop, rearranging a display of locally made botanical soaps when my mother arrived. Her Mercedes kicked up dust on the gravel drive, and she emerged looking out of place in her tailored suit among the wildflower beds. "What are you doing, Eleanor?" she asked without preamble. I continued straightening the display. "Running my business, Mom. Daniel says you've sabotaged the bookstore, that you somehow stole all the publisher accounts." I finally turned to face her. "I didn't steal anything. I built relationships over 15 years, and when those publishers learned I was starting a distribution company, they chose to work with me." My mother's face, still beautiful at 70, hardened into familiar lines of disappointment. "Your grandfather would be ashamed. He built that bookstore for the family." The comment stung as she'd intended it to, but I was done being manipulated by family guilt. "Grandfather built it for readers," I corrected, "for the community. And he left it to all three of us because he valued different perspectives. Daniel's the one who turned it into a power struggle. He has vision, my mother insisted. The store needs modernizing. The store needs to remember what makes it special. I gestured around us. Just like this garden, it's not about competing with Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It's about creating an experience that honors books and the people who love them. My mother glanced around, seeming to truly see the gardens for the first time. The pathways lined with literary quotes forged in metal, the children's section with fairy tale-themed plantings, the small amphitheater where we hosted readings. This is bigger than I realized, she admitted reluctantly. It's been here for 7 years, Mom. You've just never visited before. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps guilt. I've been busy. We all make choices about what deserves our time. I kept my voice gentle but firm. I chose to build something that combines my loves, books and gardens. Daniel chose to focus on taking over Thornfield. You chose to support him. My mother squared her shoulders. What will it take to fix this? The store can't function without reliable inventory. That's simple. Hayes Literary will distribute to Thornfield under the same terms we offer other local bookstores. Fair pricing, regular delivery, no special treatment, good or bad. Daniel won't accept that. Working with you now would feel like surrender. I shrugged. That's his choice. But this isn't about winning or losing, Mom. It's about building something sustainable. After she left, Jackson found me in the Japanese meditation garden, sitting beside the small koi pond. Your mother didn't stay long, he observed, settling, on the bench beside me. She never does. She came to negotiate Daniel's surrender, but I don't think she realized that's what she was doing. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. You've built something special here, Ellie. Something that's truly yours. Looking around at the gardens, at the careful integration of books and nature, the spaces designed for both solitude and community, I felt a surge of pride. Yes, I have. What happens next? Now we grow, I said simply. Over the next few weeks, Hayes Heritage Gardens transformed. The small bookstore section in our gift shop expanded into an adjacent building, featuring carefully curated selections that complemented our botanical themes. We hired 2 additional staff members to handle the increased distribution business. Local authors, learning of the change in management at Thornfield, began contacting us about hosting their events. Our garden amphitheater became a popular venue for readings and book launches, especially as summer arrived and the evening air filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. 3 weeks after my firing, Marion Walsh's book launch for Southern Roots, a cookbook featuring heirloom vegetables, drew over 200 people to our pavilion. As I introduced her to enthusiastic applause, I caught sight of a familiar figure at the back of the crowd. Marcus, my cousin, looking uncomfortable but determined. After the presentation, as attendees lined up for signed copies and samples of recipes, Marcus approached. "This is impressive," he said, gesturing around at the gardens illuminated by string lights, the crowd of happy book lovers, the display of Marion's books arranged beside baskets of vegetables grown on our property. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely surprised to see him. "It's been a labor of love." Marcus shifted his weight. "Daniel doesn't know I'm here." I assumed as much. "The store is struggling," he admitted. "Deliveries are delayed. Customers are complaining. Daniel's too proud to work with your company. But..." He trailed off. "But you're on the board too." I finished for him. He nodded. "I've always stayed out of the conflicts between you two, but this isn't just about family dynamics anymore. It's about the survival of Grandpa's legacy." I studied my cousin's face, seeing genuine concern there. "What are you proposing?" "A meeting. Just you, me, and the store manager Daniel hired to replace you. No Daniel, no your mother. Just a practical discussion about how to move forward." I considered this. "I'm willing to meet, but I won't compromise on terms just because we're family." Marcus smiled ruefully. "That's fair. More than fair, considering." The meeting took place the following Monday in neutral territory, a conference room at the local library. Jerome Phillips, the new manager, turned out to be a sharp, pragmatic man with 20 years in book retail. "I'll be blunt," he said after introductions. "Thornfield is hemorrhaging customers. We need your distribution channels, and we need to stop the narrative in town that there's a family feud. What does Daniel think about this meeting? I asked. Jerome. And Marcus exchanged glances. He doesn't know, Jerome admitted. But he hired me to fix problems, and right now, you're both the problem and the solution. I couldn't help but laugh at his candor. Fair enough. Here are my terms. Standard distribution. Contracts, the same as any other bookstore. No special treatment. Additionally, I want Hayes Gardens and Thornfield to co-sponsor the annual literary festival next month. Show the community we can work together professionally, regardless of family dynamics. Marcus looked relieved. That's reasonable. One more thing, I added. Daniel doesn't contact me directly about business matters. All communication goes through proper channels. Jerome to our distribution manager. Jerome nodded. Agreed. As spring turned to summer, an uneasy peace settled between the businesses. Hayes Literary Partners supplied Thornfield books with prompt deliveries and fair pricing. The Literary Festival, co-sponsored by both businesses, was a tremendous success, drawing visitors from 3 states. I saw Daniel only once during this time, across the town square during the festival. Our eyes met briefly, his narrowing mine steady. He turned and walked away. My mother surprisingly became a more frequent visitor to the gardens. At first, her visits were clearly reconnaissance missions, assessing how well we were doing compared to Thornfield. But gradually, I noticed her lingering longer, sometimes bringing a book to read beside the koi pond. One evening in August, as I was closing up the office, she appeared in the doorway. "Do you have a moment?" she asked, more hesitant than I'd ever seen her. Of course. She sat across from my desk, looking around at the office with its walls of botanical prints and shelves of books. "Your great-grandmother would be proud," she said finally. "I found some of her old photographs. Thought you might want them for the gardens." She placed a worn envelope on my desk. Inside were sepia-toned images of a young woman, my namesake, standing proudly in gardens that I recognized as earlier versions of the ones surrounding us now. "I never understood why you were so drawn to this place," my mother continued. "To me, it was just old family land, not worth keeping. But seeing what you've created here..." She gestured vaguely. "It's special, Eleanor." Coming from my mother, this was monumental praise. "Thank you," I said simply. "Daniel is struggling," she admitted after a moment. "Not just the store, though. Your distribution arrangement has stabilized that. But personally, his pride is wounded. I'm sorry for that," I said, and meant it. "But I won't apologize for building something of my own. I'm not asking you to." My mother's gaze was direct. "Now, I'm asking if there's a path forward, for the family." I considered this carefully. "I don't know. That depends on Daniel as much as me." She nodded, accepting this. "The board meeting is next week. There will be a proposal to formally merge Hayes Literary with Thornfield, creating a parent company. 2 divisions, separate but connected. You would return to the board." My surprise must have shown on my face. "It wasn't my idea," she added quickly. "It was Jerome's, supported by Marcus. Daniel is considering it." "And you?" I asked. "What do you think?" My mother looked out the window at the gardens, now bathed in golden evening light. "I think it's time to honor what each of you has built, in your own ways. Your grandfather left the store to all 3 of you for a reason. Perhaps this arrangement, separate but connected, is what he envisioned all along." The proposal wasn't perfect. There would be details to negotiate, boundaries to establish, old wounds that might never fully heal. But as I walked the paths of Hayes Heritage Gardens that evening after my mother left, I felt a sense of possibility. Had built something uniquely mine. Something that would endure regardless of what happened with Thornfield. But perhaps there was a way to honor both legacies. The bookstore my grandfather built and the gardens my great-grandmother had loved. The sun was setting as I reached the far edge of the property, where a small gate connected to the neighboring land still owned by my family. In my great-grandmother's time, the gardens had extended all the way to where Thornfield Books now stood, creating a continuous landscape of literature and nature. maybe, just maybe, there was a way to bridge the garden between us once more. 1 year after being fired, I stood on the newly constructed pathway connecting Hayes Heritage Gardens to Thornfield Books. The literary trail, as we'd named it, wound through native plantings, with reading nooks and poetry installations scattered along its quarter-mile length. The grand opening had drawn hundreds of visitors, and now, as the crowd dispersed, I found myself alone on the path with Daniel. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. This was a good idea. It was Jerome's initially, I acknowledged, but I think it works. Daniel nodded, looking out over the gardens rather than at me. "Sales are up 20% since the trail opened. The garden connection gives us something the online retailers can't match." "That was always the point," I said quietly. "Using our strengths instead of fighting each other." My brother was silent for a long moment. "I was wrong," he finally said, the words clearly difficult for him. "Not about everything. The store did need modernizing, but about you, about what you bring to the business." It wasn't a full apology, but from Daniel, it was significant. "Thank you for saying that. The merged company is stronger than either. Business would have been separately," he continued, still in business speak, but the sentiment was genuine. "Your distribution connections? My technological updates? It works." I smiled faintly. "A reluctant success story." Daniel almost smiled back. Almost. "The board meeting next month, I'd like you to present the expansion plans for the literary gardens. Your vision, not mine." With that, he nodded once and walked back toward the bookstore, leaving me standing on the path between our two worlds. Sophia found me there a few minutes later. "Was that actual human communication I witnessed?" "Between you and Daniel?" she asked, only half joking. "Progress," I said. "Slow, imperfect progress." "Like gardening," she observed. "Exactly like gardening. Some things can't be rushed." We walked together toward the heart of Hayes Heritage Gardens, where customers browsed, books among the blooms, and children chased butterflies between shelves of stories. What had begun as my contingency plan, my protection against betrayal, had blossomed into something more meaningful than mere revenge. I had built something true to myself, not in opposition to my family legacy, but as an extension of it. A new branch from old roots, growing in its own direction while remaining connected to what came before. And in the garden between us, something new continued to grow.